Well, leaders of Britain, France, Germany and Poland have met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv, calling for a 30-day ceasefire in Russia's war in Ukraine. The visit, seen as a strong show of unity following Russia's Victory Day parade in Moscow, marks the first joint trip to Ukraine by these four European leaders. They warn that if Moscow rejects the ceasefire proposal, coordinated new sanctions may follow. The diplomatic push comes amid shifting U.S. policy under President Donald Trump, who has clashed with Zelensky but now supports a ceasefire and has resumed military aid. Trump has warned of tougher sanctions if Russia stalls peace talks and hints he could walk away from efforts if progress stalls. Russia responded cautiously, with the Kremlin saying a truce is possible if Western arms shipments to Ukraine stops. Meanwhile, EU leaders backed calls to prosecute Putin for war crimes as he hosted allies. Well, joining us now to discuss the top stories in the world today is international affairs analyst Dr. Laskiewicz. He joins us from London. Good to have you this weekend. This ceasefire agreement does not take away the issues which remain very, very present, as Marco Rubio did confirm earlier, between the Pakistani and Indian governments to discuss some sets of, broader issues, presumably Kashmir, talking about the issues with India and Pakistan now.
Yes, the central problem with the ceasefire is that's just merely a palliative. The fundamental issues have not been addressed, and as a result, one, the ceasefire may not even hold. It's quite common for ceasefires to be violated. And number two, after a few days, it's entirely possible the conflict may resume, for the very simple reason that until they sign a treaty between them, a real treaty about Kashmir, then the fundamental issues not being addressed will mean that there will be a possible place for wars time and time again.
Besides the issue of the treaty, what neutral approach could settle this Kashmir territorial struggle that's begun ongoing since 1947?
Quite right, since 1947. It's the partition. The fundamental problem is that there is no easy solution. Kashmir had, so to speak, a mixed situation, and both India and Pakistan both claim it, and neither side are willing to renounce their claims, and therefore it is most unlikely that any actual real treaty can arise until both sides decide that they don't want to fight about this particular square of ground. But that's unlikely because, as I've pointed out, the Muslims have their views, the Hindus and the Indians theirs, and therefore the ceasefire, I would assume, is unlikely to hold because of this. It's only because of American pressure that anything has been agreed at all. And the moment, so to speak, Donald Trump's back is turned, it'll probably break out again, the conflict.
Marek, what do we know about the attack that initiated all of this?
Well, it's a terrorist attack, and it's happened before, and the Indians assert that such terrorists are trained in Pakistan, which Pakistan denies. It is not an unusual situation. The central problem is if, and it seems most likely that some sort of training does occur in Pakistan, until Pakistan cracks down on this, there will be attacks in future. And the moment there's an attack, the Indians will retaliate. On the other hand, the reason why there are attacks is because some people in Pakistan feel that the territory is in fact having many Muslims in it, should be part of Pakistan. And they have the similar situation to what was in the eastern part of Ukraine, where you've got people of one nationality or religion who don't necessarily want to be ruled by somebody else. There's a further aspect to this which is noted. There is, in fact, some Kashmiris don't want to be either in India or Pakistan. A little is said about this, of course, but there is another aspect just to note as we go through. And ideally, such people being an independent Kashmir might well be a solution. But at present, this is not being pushed. Rather, we're seeing a conflict.
Now, A lot of people have blamed, Pakistan for all of this, being that over the years they've had terrorist, attacks, which India have called for some sort of, reconciliation to see how security can be beefed up to ensure that, lives are not lost over 4, 3, 5 times. And some analysts are actually, pointing fingers to Pakistan not taking accountability with regards, such terrorist attacks. What is your, summation of this?
Yes, indeed, you could say that. There is a central problem, though. There is no law about this. This is international, and there is no way of enforcing the law in the sense that there's no international committee which can lay the blame. Pakistan does indeed, I think, have at least is the site of the training. But then again, the Pakistanis have mixed feelings about the fact that India is controlling parts of Kashmir. And this is the problem. Until Pakistan agrees, and the Pakistanis agrees that some part of Kashmir must be in Indian hands, these things will happen over and over again. That there is no immediate solution, except for what I pointed out, that some Kashmiris will prefer to be independent of both nations. And in principle, that could be something that could be tried. But of course, neither Pakistan nor India want to give up so much as a square inch of territory.
Another realization, in the course of the news developing today, Pakistan, we realize, depend on 90% of Indian waters. There's a water treaty suspension by India and Pakistan, which Pakistan depends on for its existential needs. Hopefully, this can be resolved as well, which could form part of the treaty that you're talking about, so that there could be a de-escalation of the tension between the two.
Yes, any sort of treaty would have to take that into account, trade between them, including tourism, well, everything to be exact. Any sort of treaty does. The problem here is there's no, if you like, goodwill on either side for the treaty. If it wasn't for the American pressures, and in Pakistan, for example, they have a way of saying what really motivates in Pakistan really counts as Allah, the army, and the Americans, the 3 A's. But if it wasn't for the Americans, the third A, there would be no ceasefire. But whether the Americans can enforce it or keep it going, if there are fundamental differences between them, is yet to be seen. After all, Donald Trump did not succeed in Ukraine, and he's only temporarily succeeded right now in India and Pakistan.
In terms of territorial disputes now, seeing that that is the key issue here, it's not something that can be resolved quickly by any means, is it?
No, this will take very long-term negotiations. But actually, negotiations are not the fundamental issue. Usually treaties work because both sides are sick of war or have arrived at a ceasefire or, if you like, a boundary which they can both accept. And the treaties, if you like, the icing on top. But there's no sign that the Pakistanis and Indians are happy with the Kashmiri frontier as it stands now, which sort of developed when both sides' armies ran together, each wanting the whole of Kashmir. As a result, the negotiation will be very long and fruitless until there's this fundamental acceptance, which is most unlikely.
We talk about Trump here. A lot of people are giving credit to Trump for being a global peacemaker, being that he's trying to settle the issue in Israel, Gaza. He's also playing a key role in Russia, Ukraine, and now we have the Indian talk, which Marco Rubio stated that 48 hours they stayed up all night to ensure that, India and Pakistan came to a halt on this. What is your take on Trump's role as, being the global peacemaker?
There are three aspects to this. For a start, all American presidents have become involved in every dispute simply because American hegemony, if you like, reaches around the world. Number two, he undoubtedly does not like wars. He's against them. He doesn't like the suffering, doesn't like the killing, and he puts a lot of pressure on for there to be ceasefires. And to that extent, it's thanks to him, as a peacemaker indeed, there's a ceasefire at all, which is good news. But, and here comes the problem, he's only as good as what he can enforce. Now, in Ukraine and Russia, in the end, he couldn't enforce anything and sort of walked away from it. He hasn't said much about Israel and Gaza for some time now, and the situation is not looking very pleasant, at least for the Gazans. And just to add to it, in India and Pakistan, sure, he has intervened, but how is he going to make sure that the conflict doesn't return? He's actually short on substance in that point of view, and therefore his role as a peacemaker is muted. And as a result, it's most unlikely he's going to win a Nobel Peace Prize in any time in the future.
Well, fingers crossed on that, Marek. Now, let's talk about the EU leaders' first ever meeting in Kyiv with President Zelensky. How significant is this meeting in Kyiv with Keir Starmer, the Ukrainian President Emmanuel Macron, and the Polish Prime Minister? It's the first time these four leaders will be meeting in Kyiv, but would this, lead to anything? And do you see Russia adhering to the 30-day ceasefire proposition by Ukraine?
Well, the answer, broadly speaking, is nothing really will come out of it, but there are some good points. First of all, the fact that the four leaders have met in Kiev does show Ukraine that whatever the US may or may not be doing, the Europeans are behind Ukraine. That is important. Moreover, four leaders like this to meet, including the nuclear powers, because that's what they are, okay, on a small scale, but nonetheless nuclear, on Great Britain and France, is important. However, the 30-day ceasefire has been mooted time and time again, and nothing much will come of it because the Russians have said it's not in their strategic interest for such a ceasefire because it gives the Ukrainians time to regroup. Number two, completely going contrary to any possibility of a peace process even starting is this constant, if you like, urge by the West and particularly by Zelensky to try to get Putin to stand for war crimes. Now, it's most unlikely that Russia is going to sign any peace treaty or even start peace talks if their leader is going to be a war criminal, in some way try it. They're just not going to do it. And so therefore, nothing will come of this proposal. And the final point is the language in which is used, in particular, Russia must do this or must do a ceasefire, is precisely what the Russians don't like and what they're talking about. This is not a world run by the West as far as the Russians would like to see it. They would like to see a multipolar world. They would like to see that they are treated, if you like, with respect. And that's what Putin is all about in many ways, because that's what he said when he took power. He said, we're never going to be liked by the West, but we can be feared and so respected by them. And so when we have four smaller nations turning up, because that's what in effect Great Britain and France are, suddenly telling that Russia must now come to a ceasefire, it is annoying, therefore, to say the least. Therefore, nothing much will come of this 30-day proposal, and I expect the war to carry on.
Indeed. Now, Trump, with his carrot and stick approach, could, impose sanctions on Russia to pressure Putin. But the question is, what sanctions can Russia agree to a ceasefire deal?
Yeah, the central problem here is what I said on the very first day of the war, when it broke out publicly, said that sanctions are next to useless, that Ukraine needs arms, and this may escalate to World War III. Well, the problem with the sanctions being next to useless is they are. Please note, 3 years of sanctions. And what has changed? Nothing. If you say that America can produce, and they're talking the secondary sanctions, they have all sorts of ideas with the banking system and so on, I really can't see that this is going to be fundamental to pushing Russia towards a peace process. Please remember, there's a separate grouping slowly building up between Russia, China, and other nations who don't like being bossed around by the West, in particular by America. And as a result, it's by no means clear that any sanctions of any sort will actually bring Russia to the negotiating table. And it is more than likely, if America was in fact to start shipping more arms, something might happen. But then again, ipso facto, you're also escalating the war. So there's no easy route to peace as it stands. And sanctions per se will not drive Russia to the negotiating table.
Now, what happens if, finally Trump decides to pull out? Because it's obvious he has said, besides the issue of tougher sanctions, if both sides do not come to an agreement, he would definitely, walk away. What happens if Trump walks away?
Yeah, this is actually what he really wants to do. He has no interest in the war, it just costs a lot of money. He's by no means convinced the war is going anywhere. And it seems just to be a waste of his time. Far more important for him are the trade tariff talks with China. Now, that is important. Also, as a result of him walking away, could Ukraine cope? Well, he might be able to supply them some arms, I suppose. But the point is that he doesn't see much of a route here. What I think was disappointing for him is the difficulty of negotiating with Russia. And the reason is that he's really an amateur in political negotiations, and the Russians are experts. In their time, they've run rings around Nazi Germany, or for that matter, Poland, in all sorts of negotiations. The SALT Treaty, for example, took years of effort because the Russians are very, very detailed and, how can you put, not exactly manipulative, but certainly demanding partners to any negotiations. And therefore, it's most unlikely that anything fast is going to happen. And he's just basically not interested. If he does walk away, if he does not supply Ukraine with arms, the Ukraine will be in serious trouble militarily, and Russia could win. If he carries on supplying arms, it means a drain on the American economy. So actually, that's the reason why he's frustrated, amongst other things. There is no easy solution.
Thank you so much, Marek Laskiewicz. That's the much time we have to discuss the India-Pakistan ceasefire and also the European leaders meeting in Kyiv. How significant?